When people talk about Leadville, they call it a ghost town with a zip code. The air's thin enough to make your lungs hurt, and the mountains around it still glitter with what's left of the silver boom. To tourists, it's all postcards and antique stores, but if you stay a few nights, you start hearing it. The hollow wind that moves under the streets like something buried alive. That's what drew me and Nick there last fall. We ran a small YouTube channel about abandoned places. Nothing huge, just urban exploration with some half-decent editing. We'd done asylums, ghost towns, storm drains. Leadville was supposed to be the finale for our season. A sealed mine rumored to be cursed after an explosion in the 1980s. The name locals still whisper, the Murdoch shaft. Nobody had filmed inside it before. We arrived just after sunset. The whole town looked like a painting someone forgot to finish. Snow, streetlights, and that quiet you only get at high elevation. We parked near the old smelter ruins and hiked out with our gear. Nick carried the camera pack, and I had the rope and lights. The plan was simple. Get inside, get B-roll, tell a story about miners trapped below, and head out before the cold got dangerous. But when we reached the entrance, it wasn't like the photos online. The boards sealing the tunnel were gone. Fresh snow had piled against the edges smooth, except for a single groove, like something wide had slid out. I remember Nick shining the flashlight down into the black and saying, "It's breathing." I laughed it off until I heard it too. A faint, rhythmic exhale from somewhere deep inside, steady as a sleeping thing. We told ourselves it was air pressure, maybe temperature shift, but it had a pattern, a human rhythm. We marked our descent on camera. Quick intro, sound check, battery life. The mine swallowed the light immediately. The air grew warmer, moist. Our voices echoed wrong, overlapping like two recordings slightly out of sync. A few hundred feet in, we found the first sign of life. A collapsed helmet, cracked open, with frost inside shaped like lungs. Nick joked that we'd struck horror gold. I didn't laugh. Every few minutes we'd hear the low rush again like a distant sigh, followed by a pause that made my eardrums ache. When I checked the temperature gauge, it fluctuated between 40 and 60 in seconds. Breathing does that. Inhale cold, exhale warm. It made no sense down there. We reached a junction where the tunnel forked in 3 directions. I marked the walls with chalk arrows pointing back out. That's when the first anomaly hit the sound recorder. It registered a whisper neither of us made, low, drawn out, almost tender. "Don't leave yet." Nick froze. The playback confirmed it. Our voices, then a third one behind mine timed perfectly between our breaths. We decided to press deeper. The left passage narrowed fast, barely wide enough for our packs. Water dripped from the ceiling, but it didn't sound like water. It clicked, timed to the same rhythm as the breathing. When I glanced back at Nick, his light flickered across the wall, revealing fresh marks in the dust. 5 long drag lines, like someone clawing to get out. We recorded everything. Content first, fear later. An hour in, we found the remnants of a cave-in, timber supports half buried in debris, old helmets stacked like offerings. I set up the tripod for a long exposure, and that's when the air shifted. A slow pull inward, deep enough to make my ears pop. The dust on the floor rose and twisted in the beam like fog. "Backdraft," Nick asked, but there was no exit nearby. The mine was inhaling. We followed the draft toward a vertical shaft. The rope ladder had rotted to threads. I leaned over the edge and felt a pulse. Not wind, not vibration, but something pushing against the air itself. My chest tightened, like I was standing in front of a speaker turned too low to hear. I dropped a stone. It fell forever, before landing in something soft. The echo came back wet. Nick wanted to descend. I wanted daylight. He argued the whole way, calling me paranoid, but I could see it in his face too, that thin layer of fear right under the skin. We set up the pulley, tested the rope, and he went first. I filmed him until his light became a dot below. "It opens up," he yelled. Then silence. The rope twitched once, twice. I leaned over, shouting his name. Nothing. Then the rope slackened, like it had been released. When I pulled it up, the end was clean. No fray, no break. Just cut smooth, damp to the touch. I should have run. Instead, I lowered the camera on a backup line to see what the lens caught. The feed came through static, but for a second the frame cleared. Nick stood at the bottom, motionless, light shining up. Around him, the tunnel walls were moving. Slow waves through the rock, breathing in and out, and in one inhalation he vanished, like the air had swallowed him whole. The rope jerked upward, nearly pulling me in. I dropped it and stumbled back. The sound of exhaling roared up the shaft, warm and reeking of metal. Every light on my rig flickered, synced to that pulse. The chalk arrows behind me had vanished. In their place, new markings carved into the wall. Deeper. I don't remember choosing to follow them. The next few minutes exist only on the footage I found later. Me walking deeper, whispering to myself, answering questions no one asked. My voice sounds calm, rehearsed, like narration. Then the feed cuts, replaced by a close-up of my own face, filmed from behind. When I came to, I was outside, lying in the snow near the entrance. My camera was gone. The tunnel boards were nailed shut again, fresh timber, clean edges. The air was still, quiet. I found Nick's backpack by the car, zipped and dry. Inside was the camera we'd dropped. The card fully recorded, time-stamped 10 hours ahead of real time. On the playback, the final clip shows me emerging from the shaft alone, setting up the tripod, looking straight into the lens and whispering, "One more breath." Then the screen goes black. The mic keeps recording for another minute. A deep, slow inhale, followed by a sigh that fogs the lens from inside the camera. The camera shouldn't have been recording when I found it, but it was. Battery full, file name different, mine too do raw. I didn't remember making that label. The timestamp showed tomorrow's date. I told myself it was just a glitch, date reset, wrong internal clock, but when I opened the first clip, I was already in it. Me, sitting in the driver's seat, snow falling outside, talking to someone off-screen. The audio was faint, but clear. "You came back," I said. Then static. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound didn't stop. The static kept playing from inside the computer, pulsing low, almost like breath. That's when I realized the sound wasn't coming from the speakers. It was coming from the floorboards. The boards flexed once, twice, like something breathing underneath the car. I turned the key. The engine clicked, but wouldn't start. My breath fogged the windshield, and for a moment, I saw my reflection blink at a different rhythm than me. I made it to the motel by foot. Leadville after dark feels like a painting left out in the cold. Gas lights dimmed, windows iced, silence so heavy it hums. I booked a room and locked the door twice. When I plugged the hard drive into the motel TV, the files had multiplied. Hundreds of them, all named Mine 3 Raw, Mine 4 Raw, counting upward. Each one was static for the first few seconds, then shifted into scenes from my own point of view. Me walking through the town, opening doors I hadn't entered yet, calling names I hadn't spoken aloud. By the fourth clip, I stopped breathing, because in it, I saw Nick. He was standing in front of the mine entrance, snow melting off his jacket like steam. His eyes were gray, same color as the rock, and his mouth moved like he was whispering something over and over. I turned the volume up. Beneath the static came a slow, wet sound. Inhale, exhale, and between each breath, my name. The motel lights flickered. My phone screen lit up on its own. New file received. Mine 5 Raw. It started auto-playing. This one wasn't from a camera. It was live. The footage showed my motel room door from the hallway. I stood frozen, watching myself approach the peephole. The knock came half a second after the image. Once, twice. Then the voice. "You left me there." I opened the door. No one. Just wind spilling in from the street, carrying the smell of metal and dirt. I looked down, and there were footprints leading away, bare, wet, identical to mine. I followed them out into the snow. They stopped halfway down the street, right in front of a manhole cover. The sound beneath it was unmistakable. Breathing, deep and slow, like lungs the size of mountains. The footprints ended there, but the heat rising from below fogged the air like an exhale. I ran back to the car, drove until the signal cut out, but no matter how far I went, the recordings kept appearing. Dash cam, phone, even the radio would hiss into rhythm when I turned it on. Every channel played the same pattern. One long breath, one short. Morse code for alive. 2 days later, I got an email from a new sender. No address. Just a single file attached. Mine, Chur 6 raw. The preview thumbnail showed a cave. I hit play. The camera moved through the tunnels, steady, deliberate. Then it tilted up, and I saw myself lying against the wall, eyes open. I was wearing the same clothes from that night. My chest moved once, a shallow breath, then stopped. The camera panned down to show the ground, frost forming and melting, forming and melting. The mine wasn't collapsing. It was breathing through me. I deleted the file. It reappeared instantly in every folder I had. I smashed the laptop, but the speakers kept hissing. When I unplugged them, the sound transferred to the window, fogging the glass in slow rhythm. That's when I saw the reflection. Not mine. Nick's. He was behind me, face pale, veins dark with dust. "It still needs air," he said. His voice echoed from the radiator, from the vents, and from the snow outside. The whole room exhaled at once, lights dimming like a heartbeat. I don't remember leaving the motel. The footage picks up in the car again, driving toward the mountains. The camera must have been running the whole time. The road keeps looping the same stretch, mile marker by mile marker, until the breath on the microphone syncs perfectly with the engine. In the distance, the mountains move, just slightly, like chests rising and falling. The mine was only the mouth. The whole range was the body. When I reached the entrance again, the boards were gone. Fresh snow, smooth as a lung's lining. My camera started recording on its own. I saw my reflection in the lens. Eyes gray, skin thin like dust. The audio caught one last whisper. One more breath. Then everything went still. Days later, hikers found my car idling near the ridge, windows fogged from inside. The dash cam was on a loop, replaying the same clip. Me standing at the mine's edge, camera aimed at the darkness, whispering that line over and over. One more breath. If you go to Leadville now and listen on a calm night, you can hear it. The mine isn't sealed anymore. The air moves slow, steady, and when it exhales, the sound that comes out isn't wind, it's words. It says them softly, like remembering, "We're still down here." Loveland Pass is the kind of place that makes you believe in ghosts even if you don't. The air is thinner up there, too thin. It's not the kind of cold that numbs. It's the kind that sharpens every nerve until you can feel your heartbeat in your fingertips. The night I got stranded there, the snow wasn't falling. It was floating, tiny white flecks suspended in air like ash. Every flake seemed to hang there, motionless, until the headlights passed, and they came alive again, swirling like 1,000 small eyes. I was hauling building supplies from Denver to Silverthorne. I knew the pass was risky at night, especially in February, but the interstate had closed hours earlier. I figured I could slip through before the worst of the weather hit. I was wrong. Halfway up, visibility went from poor to non-existent. The road vanished. My GPS froze, signal gone. The only sound left was the groaning of the wind and the steady hum of tires on ice. Then the headlights picked up something strange. Roadside markers I didn't recognize. They weren't green like standard mile markers. They were white, hand-painted, each one numbered in red. The last one I passed read SN7. I didn't know it then, but locals call that stretch the Snowline, and 7 is where the road ends. After another half mile, the truck started fishtailing. I slowed, eased it onto what looked like a plowed turnout, and killed the engine. I got out to check the road, but the wind nearly knocked me over. The snow was waist-high in seconds. My footprints vanished the moment I made them. No tire tracks behind me, just smooth, untouched white. That's when I saw the light on the hill. A faint glow, amber and steady. maybe a cabin or patrol hut. It flickered once and came back, like someone adjusting a lantern. I grabbed my flashlight, layered my coat, and started climbing toward it. The slope was steeper than it looked. My breath fogged so thick it hung in the beam like smoke. For a while, I used the sound of the wind to keep my bearings. Then even that faded. It was like walking inside cotton. No sound, no distance, no sense of direction, just white. When I finally reached the building, it was half buried in snow. A wood cabin, 1 story, boarded windows, faded red cross painted near the door. The sign above it read Loveland Patrol, Snowline Unit. The handle turned easily. The door wasn't even locked. Inside was stillness, the kind that feels occupied. There was a single lantern burning on a table, a shortwave radio humming faintly beside it, and 7 heavy parkas hanging on hooks by the door. Each had the same stitched patch, Snowline 7. I remembered hearing that name years ago. Some patrol team lost in a blizzard back in the 90s. Bodies never recovered. At the time, I'd thought it was just an urban legend. Standing there, with 7 empty coats dripping snowmelt onto the floorboards, I wasn't so sure. The clock on the wall had stopped at 12:07. The coffee pot beside the stove was frozen mid-pour, a thin brown icicle stretching from spout to cup. Someone had left in a hurry, or never left at all. I turned to the radio, hoping for any signal, just static. Then, beneath it, a faint voice, low, distorted. It said my name, not shouted, whispered, like someone testing a microphone. I froze. "Who is this?" I said. The voice repeated my question perfectly, same tone, same hesitation. "Who is this?" Then the signal dissolved back into static. The radio's light blinked once, then twice, matching my heartbeat. I tried again, switching frequencies. Every channel was dead except one, buried under the white noise. A faint pattern, 2 short bursts, 1 long. Morse code for R, over and over. The rhythm matched the wind outside, except the wind had stopped. I found a logbook on the desk. The last entry read, March 12th, storm worsening, visibility nil, repeater malfunctioning. Last transmission received, ourselves. Below it were 7 signatures, each name ending with a smear of ink like frostbite. I flipped the page. A new line had appeared, the pen still wet. March 12th, storm worsening, visibility nil. Below that, my name. I threw the book shut. The sound echoed too long, like the room wasn't empty. The parkas by the door were dripping again, louder this time. The water pooled into 7 dark spots that spread across the floorboards. I swear the puddles pulsed, as if in time with breathing. The lantern flickered. The radio hissed. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the wall from outside. The back wall. There was no door there. I stood still, every nerve screaming. The knock came again, closer this time. Then a voice, muffled but clear through the boards. "Open up. We're freezing." It sounded familiar, like my dispatcher back in Denver, Nick. Same inflection, same tired drawl, but the radio was off. I hadn't given anyone my location. I backed toward the radio again and switched it on. Nick. Static. Then my own voice came through the speaker. Nick, followed by breathing. Then the voice said, "Don't leave yet." I turned the dial. No matter where I tuned, I kept hearing myself, slightly delayed like a tape loop. On one frequency, the echo was exact. My voice, my words, repeating back seconds after I said them. On another, it was ahead of me, speaking before I could. "You're going to open the door," it said. I dropped the microphone. The lantern went out. Total darkness. For a long time, I didn't move. Then faintly, a glow returned. Blue this time, coming from the window. I wiped the frost and looked outside. 7 figures stood in a half circle around the cabin. They weren't moving. Each wore a parka identical to the ones hanging by the door. Their faces were obscured by ice-covered visors. The radio clicked back on. "Do not open the door until they stop moving," it said. My voice again, calm, monotone, certain. I waited. Heart, hammering so loud I thought they'd hear it. The figures stayed still. Then one by one they started to shift, jerky, like film-skipping frames. 6, then 5, then 3. Each time I blinked, there were fewer, until only one remained standing right against the glass. I could see my reflection in its visor, fogging from inside. The speaker crackled. "We made it," said the voice. "Mine." I backed up until I hit the desk. My hand brushed the logbook. It flipped open on its own, pen upright like it was waiting. I don't remember picking it up, but my hand was moving, writing words I couldn't stop. March 12th. Storm worsening. Visibility nil. Last transmission received ourselves. The cabin felt alive. The floorboards pulsed, stretching with each gust of wind. The air grew heavy, almost warm. My breath came out black against the lantern light, curling like smoke. I looked down. The parka I wore wasn't mine. The tag said, Snowline 7. Then came the voices again all at once. 7 radios clicking on, transmitting in unison. The chorus was faint but clear. Stay inside. Stay inside. Stay inside. Every transmission timed perfectly with my breathing. When I held my breath, they paused. When I exhaled, they continued. I tried to unplug the radio, but the cord burned cold. So cold it blistered my hand. When I yanked it free, the sound kept coming, now from inside the walls. The boards around the room were breathing, stretching, contracting, groaning with the rhythm of lungs. The air felt thick, full of whispers, each one using my name like punctuation. Something outside scraped against the door, slow, deliberate, like a gloved hand tracing the wood. Then it pushed. The hinges creaked, the handle trembled. "Open up," the voice said, softer now, almost kind. "You're one of us." The door gave an inch, then stopped. I pressed my weight against it. The wind outside screamed, but it wasn't wind. It was feedback, high-pitched and layered, like every radio on the mountain turning on at once. I could hear voices within it, dozens of them, speaking over each other. Some were crying, some were laughing, all of them saying the same thing beneath the noise: "You can't leave the signal." Then everything went silent. The storm outside stopped, as if someone had muted the world. I looked through the window. The figures were gone. The snow had smoothed itself again, perfect and untouched. The only sound left was the slow tick of the radio dial turning on its own. It stopped at one final frequency, an open channel. Then my own voice came through, whispering, "Don't fall asleep. We need someone to listen." That's the last thing I remember before everything went white. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor. The fire was out. The lantern was cold. The snow had blown in through a broken window and covered half the room. The radio was silent. My footprints led from the door to the center of the room and stopped there. The floor was smooth. The logbook was still open beside me. The ink from my last entry had bled into the page, spreading outward like frost patterns. I tore the page out and stuffed it in my coat pocket before I left. When I opened the door, the storm had cleared. The mountain was silent, stars sharp enough to hurt your eyes. The world felt too still, too quiet, as if the air was waiting. I didn't look back at the cabin. I didn't need to. I could still hear the static behind me, soft as breathing. The descent from Loveland Pass should have taken 20 minutes. It took me 3 hours. Every switchback looked the same, every road sign buried under snow. I kept checking the dash clock, but it refused to move from 12:07 a.m., the same time frozen on the wall clock inside the patrol cabin. The heater was running full blast, but my hands still shook. My body was warm. The shaking wasn't from cold. It was from the noise that wouldn't stop. Even with the radio off, I could hear it. Static pressed against my skull, a whispering pulse just below hearing. I turned off the headlights for a second to make sure it wasn't interference. The darkness swallowed everything, and the static grew louder. I switched the lights back on immediately. That's when I saw the marker again, SN7, half buried, the red paint still wet. I'd been driving in circles. I floored the gas. The road ahead blurred into a tunnel of white, the kind that tricks your eyes into seeing shapes that aren't there. For a few seconds, I thought I saw figures standing in the snowbanks, waving me forward with gloved hands. Each time I blinked, they were gone. I finally spotted a gas station sign through the storm and pulled in, half relieved, half terrified that it would vanish before I stopped. The attendant was asleep behind the counter. I didn't wake him. I just went straight to the restroom to wash the blood off my palm. The frostbite blister from the radio cord had split open. When I looked up into the mirror, the reflection lagged. My lips moved a half second after I stopped talking. Behind me, the reflection of the counter was empty, even though the attendant was still snoring when I walked past. I left the restroom light on. I didn't want to see the mirror go dark. Outside, the storm had eased to a thin curtain of snow. I climbed back into the truck and started south, avoiding the pass this time. I didn't notice the radio light was on until I'd gone 10 miles. It wasn't tuned to any station, just hissing softly like it was listening. Then, under the static, a faint male voice said, "Copy." I froze. The voice was mine. The same flat tone I'd heard in the cabin. I turned the knob hard to the left. Silence for 2 seconds. Then the same voice again, louder. "Copy." I threw the microphone out the window. Didn't matter. The sound came from the vents now. Every gust of heat carried words. "Stay inside. Visibility nil." The truck filled with fog, the kind that shouldn't exist indoors. I rolled down the window, and the fog poured out in one long stream, like breath. When it cleared, I wasn't on the highway anymore, just snow in every direction. No tracks, no road, no sky, only white. The headlights picked up something ahead. A snowcat, overturned, windshield shattered. I killed the engine and walked closer. Inside were 7 parkas stiff with frost. No faces, just hollow masks of ice. On the dashboard, a radio identical to the one in the cabin clicked on by itself and began transmitting a steady heartbeat. I recognized it instantly. Mine. Same rhythm. Same pauses. The longer I listened, the more I could feel my own pulse adjusting to match. The driver's log lay open on the seat. The last entry matched mine exactly down to the handwriting. March 12th. Storm worsening. Visibility nil. Last transmission received. Ourselves. I left the snowcat and ran. I don't know for how long. The snow swallowed the footprints behind me as fast as I made them. My lungs burned, and for a moment I thought I heard someone running alongside me. 7 someones. Their breathing synchronized with mine. I screamed into the night, and the echo came back layered, a dozen versions of my voice shouting the same word. Then the echo stopped answering. When I saw headlights cutting through the white, I nearly collapsed with relief. A Department of Transportation truck pulled up, driver waving me in. I climbed into the cab, babbling about the cabin, the radios, the voices. The driver nodded silently and turned up the heat. The air smelled like ozone and metal. "You found the cabin?" he asked. His voice was calm, too calm. I nodded. "Then you shouldn't be up here," he said. "None of you should." He turned to look at me. His eyes were pale gray, the same color as the snow. There was a radio clipped to his jacket. It hissed softly. "Where's the rest of your crew?" he asked. "We heard 7 distress calls." I said I was alone. He smiled. "Not anymore." The truck engine roared, but we weren't moving. Through the windshield, the world outside wasn't snow. It was static, pure white noise rolling like waves. The road had dissolved into signal. The driver reached for the mic. "Snowline 7 reporting," he said. Then he handed it to me. "Your turn." The voice on the other end was mine again. "Copy," it said. "Visibility nil." I dropped the mic, but the sound stayed in the cab, circling us. The radio lights flickered red, one by one, until there were 7 glowing dots across the dashboard. Each blinked in perfect rhythm, breathing with the engine. I grabbed the door handle and jumped out. I landed in snow up to my waist. The truck behind me kept idling, driver still inside, staring straight ahead. His mouth moved, but no sound came out, just frost spilling into the air. Then the headlights dimmed, and the truck began to sink, slow and steady, into the white, as if the snow were swallowing it whole. The radio stayed on the surface for a few seconds, spitting static, before it vanished too. The world went quiet again. I stumbled forward until I saw a faint orange glow ahead. Another cabin, smaller, newer. I reached it just before my legs gave out. The sign above the door read Loveland Patrol Station B. I pushed inside. The interior was clean. Fresh coffee on the burner, map of the pass pinned to the wall. 7 coats hanging by the door, my coat among them. The patch read Snowline 7. I screamed. The sound barely left my throat. The radio on the desk switched on. "Do you copy?" It was the driver's voice, then Nick's, then mine. Each one speaking over the other, a chorus of the same tone. "Do you copy? Do you copy?" I pulled the plug. The static didn't stop. It just shifted pitch until it became breathing again. Slow, deep, endless. I reached for the window latch to let the air in. My reflection looked back. Frost on the inside of the glass. Behind me, 6 more reflections appeared, their breath fogging in sync with mine. "We made it," one of them said. My hand froze on the latch. I understood then. The mountain didn't keep the bodies. It kept the signal. Every voice that ever called for help up here was still transmitting, waiting for a listener to answer. The logbook on the desk flipped open by itself. The pen rolled toward me. I didn't resist. I wrote the line as though I'd done it 100 times before. March 12th. Storm worsening. Visibility nil. Last transmission received. Ourselves. The snow against the walls began to move, pressing inward, slow as breathing. The windows fogged. I could hear 7 radios clicking on outside, one after another, their static harmonizing into a single long exhale. The door trembled under the weight of the wind. I pressed my ear against the wood. From the other side came my own voice whispering, "We're home." When the boards finally gave, the storm didn't rush in. It simply stood there, white and waiting. The last thing I remember is stepping forward and feeling the snow close over my boots, then my knees, then my mouth, until the cold became warm and the sound of wind became breathing. They say sometimes truckers crossing Loveland Pass still hear voices through the CB, especially near marker 219. It's always the same message, faint but clear through the static. Snowline 7 reporting. Visibility nil. Last transmission received. Ourselves. I took the job because I thought it would be quiet. That was the whole point. 3 weeks alone at an old summer camp near Estes Park. Just me, a stack of maintenance logs, and a to-do list long enough to keep my mind from wandering. The owner, a man named Wilkes, handed me the keys with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't go near the water after dark," he said. "Animals fall in. The lake doesn't give them back." I laughed because it sounded like an old campfire story. He didn't laugh with me. The drive up was beautiful in that early spring way. Thin fog coiled over the ridges, pines still crusted with frost, and the road just beginning to crack from thaw. Mirror Lake came into view like glass, framed perfectly by the hills. Even through the windshield it looked wrong. Too still, too symmetrical. The tree line around it didn't ripple in the water. It just hovered there, perfectly mirrored, like the world underneath was holding its breath. The cabin sat higher on the slope, rotting quietly in the cold air. I unlocked cabin 4, the one marked caretaker on the clipboard, and set my bags down. The air smelled like cedar, dust, and something faintly sweet, like old lilies. On the nightstand was a photograph, cracked down the middle, kids in matching shirts standing in front of the lake, all smiling except the one on the far left. His face was turned toward the water. I told myself the photo must have belonged to the last caretaker. There were signs of him everywhere, muddy boots by the door, a half-drunk thermos of coffee on the counter, and a calendar still open to June 1987. No one had erased the X's through each day. The final week was blank. I spent the first 2 days clearing brush and checking the generator. The silence took getting used to. Even the wind sounded heavy, like it moved through syrup. The lake never changed. It stayed perfectly smooth, no matter the weather. The third morning, I found footprints near the dock, bare, small, leading to the water, and stopping at the edge. I told myself they were old, preserved by the cold. But that night, when I stepped outside to smoke, they were gone. The water caught the glow of my lighter, and for a second I saw my reflection. Only it didn't move the same way I did. I flicked the lighter again, slower this time. The reflection smiled. I didn't. I went back inside and locked the door. The lock clicked twice, once under my hand and once again a half-second later, as if someone on the other side was matching me. Sleep didn't come easy after that. Every creak of the wood sounded like a footstep outside. Around midnight, I heard splashing, soft, steady, rhythmic. I looked out the window, and the lake was still flat as glass. The sound kept going. It was coming from the cabin's sink. The faucet was off, but water dripped anyway, thick and clear. Each drop hit the basin with a perfect echo, like it was falling farther than it should have. When I leaned closer, I realized the drain wasn't dark metal. It was deep water, black and bottomless. My own face shimmered below the surface. It blinked. I didn't. The next morning, I drove into town to get a new faucet head, but halfway down the road, I saw something in my rearview mirror. Cabin 4 reflected behind me, the lake perfectly still, except for a figure standing on the dock. I braked hard, heart slamming. No one was supposed to be there. I got out, looked back, and the dock was empty. But when I checked the mirror again, the figure was still there, closer now, half submerged, watching the road. By the time I got back to camp, the air felt thicker, colder. The cabins leaned inward toward the lake, as if they'd all shifted a few inches while I was gone. I noticed something new near the base of cabin 3, a small wooden sign half buried in moss. The paint had flaked away, but the word reflection was still legible. Beneath it, someone had scratched another word in shaky letters: return. That night, I couldn't stay inside. The walls felt too close. I walked to the dock, flashlight shaking in my hand. The beam caught the surface of the lake and disappeared instantly, like the light had been swallowed. I knelt and touched the water. It wasn't cold. It felt like skin. Beneath the reflection of the moon, I saw movement. Faint outlines of trees, cabins, and people standing between them, their shapes rippling like heat haze. I told myself it was a trick of depth perception, a double image from the light. But when I leaned closer, one of the figures turned its head. Its eyes were open, glowing faintly, and its mouth moved underwater, like it was trying to speak. I stumbled back and ran for the cabin. The door was already open. Inside, the air was wet, heavy, the smell of lilies stronger than ever. The photograph on the nightstand had changed. All the children were gone except the one who'd been facing the water. His head was turned now, staring at the camera, eyes black. The mirror above the dresser was fogged, but words were written in the condensation. Look down. I did. The floorboards were dark, glistening. When I touched them, my fingers came away wet. Water seeped up through the wood in thin streams pooling at my feet. I could see shapes beneath the surface, hands, faces, eyes pressed up against the boards. Their lips moved in slow rhythm, forming the same word over and over. Return. The lights flickered, and for a moment I could see through the cabin floor like it wasn't there at all. The lake directly beneath me, black and endless, and the reflection of the cabin below it, perfectly intact. Only in that reflection, I wasn't standing alone. The version of me down there was smiling. I ran outside into the cold air, gasping, the smell of lilies clinging to my clothes. The lake was still, perfectly smooth again. Only now, the moon's reflection was gone. The water showed only the sky above it, blank, starless, empty. I didn't go back to the cabin that night. I stayed in the truck, doors locked, staring at the lake until dawn. When the first light hit, I saw something floating near the dock. A piece of paper pale against the black water. I waded in just enough to reach it. It was a calendar page, June 1987. Every day crossed out except one. The last box was blank. The date was today. By the second week, I stopped marking the days. The calendar on my phone kept resetting to June 1987 no matter what I changed. Even the sunrise felt the same every morning. Same light, same angle, same chill. It wasn't repetition. It was replay. The camp stayed quiet, but not dead. Each cabin groaned differently at night, like they were speaking through the wood. Sometimes I'd wake to the sound of footsteps circling cabin 4. Always slow, always stopping right at the door, never knocking. I tried calling Wilkes, but every time the call connected, I heard only water. A drip, a splash, a faint echo of my own voice whispering something I couldn't catch. One morning, I found fresh footprints again, small, bare, leading from the dock up toward the mess hall. The doors there had been chained shut when I arrived. Now they hung open. Inside smelled like mildew and wet paint. The tables were overturned, and the far wall was covered in mirror shards arranged like scales. Someone had carved a line into the wood beneath them. We stayed too long. The shards reflected the room wrong. They didn't show me. They showed the mess hall as it had been. Bright lights, kids laughing, counselors walking past. The sound came first, then the smell of camp food. Smoke, sunscreen. I blinked, and everything vanished except the noise of my breathing. One shard still rippled, though, like water instead of glass. I leaned closer. It showed the dock at night. A child stood at the edge, hair plastered wet against her head, whispering something into the lake. A second later, she turned, eyes white, mouth still moving. The shard fogged over and cracked. That night, rain came heavy. I heard it on the roof, on the lake, everywhere. But when I looked outside, the sky was clear. The sound was coming from inside the walls, soft, rhythmic, like rainfall against glass. I pressed my ear to the paneling and heard voices inside. Not words, just the vibration of speech, like a conversation happening 1 inch beneath the surface of the wood. When I stepped back, the wallpaper blistered outward. I left the cabin with my flashlight moving toward the dock again because I didn't know where else to go. Mist was crawling off the water, so thick I could barely see my own hands. The reflection of the camp was brighter than the real thing now. Lights on in every window below the surface. Shapes moved inside those reflections, going about their lives like campers from a memory. I saw myself too. Down there, my reflection was walking toward the edge of the mirror lake with a lantern in hand. I looked down at my empty hands. No lantern. Then the reflection raised its light and pointed it upward, right at me. The mist blew cold across my face, and suddenly the world reversed. The air thickened, heavy as water. I couldn't tell if I was above the lake anymore or under it. The trees around me rippled like weeds. My ears popped. Every sound came muffled, distant. I tried to move, but the ground under my boots gave way. I fell through what should have been solid wood and plunged into black. It wasn't water exactly, more like weightless air that pressed from all sides. In front of me, the camp hung upside down, pale and perfect. Kids laughed on the shore, counselors blew whistles, and the sun burned white over the hills. I could see cabin 4, brand new, with someone standing in the window. It was me, only cleaner, younger, smiling. He waved once, slow, like goodbye. When I tried to swim toward the surface, the pressure grew. A voice behind me whispered, "Don't break it. You'll wake them." I turned. The lake's bottom wasn't mud. It was mirror, smooth and endless. Faces pressed against it from below, mouths opening and closing in unison. Each face was mine. Each one whispered a different year. I screamed. The sound didn't move. It stayed frozen in front of me like a bubble. When it finally broke, the entire lake shook. The reflection shattered into ripples that rippled back. My lungs filled with sweetness, lilies, and copper. Then I was standing on the dock again, soaked but breathing. The moon was gone. The stars were gone. Everything was black except the water, which now glowed faint blue from beneath. Figures walked across it like glass, hundreds of them, children and adults both, their eyes hollow mirrors. They stopped at the shore and faced me. The one closest spoke with my voice. "You stayed too long." The words echoed through every throat. Behind them, the reflection of the camp darkened until nothing remained but outlines of light. I ran for the truck. The engine turned over once, then died. The windshield fogged from inside, shapes pressing against it like hands on glass. My own reflection leaned out from the driver's seat below, eyes black and smiling. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, then reached toward the glass. Cracks spidered across it, and when I blinked, the cracks were on my skin instead. The next thing I remember is waking in a hospital in Lyons. A hiker found me walking barefoot down the highway, clothes soaked, muttering about reflections. The doctor said I'd been missing 5 days. Wilkes came to see me once. He didn't say much. He just left a photo on the table, the one from cabin 4. In the new version, I was in the picture, standing beside the kids, all of us smiling, all of us facing the lake. They released me a week later. I drove straight home and swore I'd never go back, but the mirror in my bathroom doesn't agree. At night, the glass ripples like the surface of a pond. Sometimes I hear the sound of paddles dipping into water. Sometimes I smell lilies. Last night, I leaned close and saw something move behind me. A faint shimmer of light, the glow of a camp lantern swinging in the dark, and then a voice, mine again, whispering just above the hum of the mirror. We stayed too long. They call it the loneliest road in Colorado, but that doesn't do it justice. Highway 50 after midnight feels less like a road and more like an artery cut straight through nothing. It runs past forgotten gas stations, rusted fences, and stretches of land so flat you can see the curve of the earth. The locals in Canyon City joke that once you pass the last diner, the world just gives up trying. I never laughed at that one, not after what happened last spring. I was hauling irrigation pumps west toward Gunnison. The company paid extra for overnight runs, fewer cops, fewer tourists, and I liked the quiet. It was early April, the kind of night when the stars look so close you could chip one off with your side mirror. I remember thinking how perfect it was. No wind, no traffic, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the soft drone of late-night AM radio. About 40 miles out, somewhere near Royal Gorge, the signal started to fade. I hit scan and let the dial wander through a storm of static. For half a second, it locked onto something. A voice, faint and urgent. Eastbound vehicle, White Kenworth, Colorado tags. Then the frequency skipped again. I thought I'd misheard until it came back, louder. Eastbound vehicle, heavy freight, 1 occupant, reduced speed. It wasn't a weather report. It wasn't even a proper broadcast. No call sign, no station ID, just that monotone voice chewing through the static like a machine trying to sound calm. I laughed to myself and said, "Copy that," into the CB, because truckers do dumb things when we're tired. The voice didn't answer, but my dashboard clock flickered and froze at 12:07 a.m., the same minute the voice had come through. The hands on my wristwatch stopped too. A sign passed on the right, mile marker 203. But the paint looked fresh, like someone had stenciled it that morning. The next sign I saw said 203 again, then 203 a third time. The road hadn't bent, yet somehow it looped. By the time I hit the Fremont County line, the radio was gone completely. No music, no news, just the kind of static that breathes in and out like lungs. I rolled the window down, expecting to hear wind. Nothing. The air was heavy and dry, full of that metallic scent you get before lightning. I saw the first lights just past the Cotopaxi turnoff, blue and red flashing ahead. An accident, I figured. I slowed and pulled onto the shoulder, ready to offer help, but when I rounded the bend, the lights weren't on a cruiser. They floated, 2 suspended orbs hanging 20 feet above the road, pulsing in rhythm. Beneath them stood a payphone bolted into a concrete island. No booths out here anymore, not for years. The receiver was swinging. It rang once. Then my CB rang with it, same tone, same pitch. When I picked up the CB mic, the ringing stopped. A woman's voice whispered through the speaker, "Don't take the pass tonight." "Who's this?" I asked. Static. Then a sigh. "You're still on 50, aren't you?" I dropped the mic. The air inside the cab felt electric, like my fillings were vibrating. The payphone outside lit up again, casting everything in cold blue. On the concrete beneath it, I saw words scrawled in black marker. "Call home." I didn't. I started the engine and kept driving. The road stretched straight and black ahead, unrolling into the dark like film through a projector. The scanner flipped back on by itself. "Emergency bulletin," the voice said. "Eastbound vehicle has ignored advisory." My headlights caught something moving along the ditch, a figure in orange coveralls waving a flare. I braked, half relieved to see another human, but the flare didn't flicker. It glowed steady, unblinking like an LED. When I stopped, the figure vanished. The flare remained, burning cold white on the ground. I stepped out to check it and found it wasn't a flare at all. It was a microphone. I left it where it lay and got back in. The GPS showed no route, just a blinking dot over gray nothing. Then the radio switched frequencies again, one of those late-night mountain stations you only catch between valleys. The host was reading names, not news, not traffic, names. My name among them. Driver Marcus Lane, 37, eastbound US 50. He listed my cargo manifest word for word. I pulled the plug from the stereo, but the sound kept coming through the air vents. Outside, the land had changed. The mesas were gone, replaced by black ridges lit from beneath, as if the ground was hollow and something bright moved underneath. Every few miles, a dead signpost flashed to life showing distances that made no sense. Gunnison, miles scratched out. Canyon City, miles scratched out. I told myself it was exhaustion. I'd been driving too long. So I took the next turnout, a rest area marked Salida Summit, and parked. The lot was empty except for a single vending machine humming in the dark. I leaned against the truck hood and stared at the mountains. They didn't move. They just watched. When I went to buy a coffee, the vending machine screen blinked on. No prices, no logos, just text scrolling upward. "Stay in the cab. Do not reply." The hum deepened until it matched my heartbeat. I stepped back. My reflection in the glass didn't match my movement anymore. It lagged, eyes a half-second behind. Then it mouthed something that wasn't me. "You're broadcasting." I ran. The truck's cabin smelled like ozone and dust. The CB light glowed red. My voice came through the speaker, recorded from seconds earlier. "Who's this?" "You're still on 50, aren't you?" The transmission looped, layering over itself until the cab filled with overlapping versions of me, each slightly delayed. The sound built into a human echo chamber, then silence. The next broadcast came through clean, gentle, almost kind. "Highway 50 closed due to fatal incident. All lanes blocked. Repeat, all lanes blocked." A pause. "Driver pending identification." I stared through the windshield. Ahead, the asphalt shimmered like water. I pressed the gas anyway. The truck rolled forward, tires whispering over something soft, not pavement. The headlights picked up fog that wasn't fog at all, just static hanging in the air, drifting like snow. The mile marker I passed glowed instead of reflecting. It read, "Recording." Every electronic in the cab came alive. The dash cam, the CB, my phone, the digital tachograph, all blinking red like eyes. The camera pointed at my face. A new voice whispered from the speaker, my own again, but slower, tired. "Do you copy?" I answered without meaning to. "Copy." The world outside froze. The stars blinked off one by one until nothing remained but the highway stretching into blackness. For a few seconds, I thought maybe I'd driven off the map entirely. Then I saw headlights in the mirror. Another semi, same make, same color. It drew closer, fast. I flashed my brights to warn him, but he matched it perfectly. Same pattern, same timing. When he pulled up beside me, I turned to look. The cab was empty. The wheel turned itself. And in the passenger seat, a radio identical to mine blinked 1207. I hit the brakes. The twin truck vanished. Only its taillights remained, floating ahead like red eyes until they dissolved into mist. The CB crackled one last time. Return. The voice was no longer mechanical or distant. It was next to my ear, close enough to fog the glass. Then everything went quiet except for the heartbeat thudding through the speakers. Mine, amplified and fading. They found my rig 3 days later, near Murdoch Pass. Engine still warm, headlights on, doors locked from the inside. The radio was tuned to a dead frequency that hissed like someone breathing. And if you drive that stretch at night, locals say you can still pick up a broken transmission calling out coordinates that don't exist. Sometimes it names the make and plate of your car. Sometimes it whispers your name. And sometimes, when the road is empty enough, it just says one word: return. When they found my truck, I wasn't in it. At least that's what the report said later, but I remember standing there, hands still on the wheel, staring into a stretch of road that shouldn't have existed. The asphalt ahead was smooth, too smooth, and the paint on the lane dividers looked wet, like someone had just finished drawing them. The radio hissed again, soft this time, like it was breathing just behind me. I told myself I was dreaming, that exhaustion had finally caught up with me. But dreams don't hum through your teeth. Dreams don't smell like ozone and diesel. The CB light blinked once, and my own voice came through. Return. Only now it sounded different. Tired, slurred, like I'd been saying it for years. I stepped out onto the shoulder. The night felt heavy, like the air itself was thickening. Off to the west, lightning flickered behind the peaks, silent and slow, showing the outline of the Rockies like a heartbeat under skin. Somewhere in that direction lay Murdoch Pass, Gunnison, and whatever lay beyond this nightmare stretch of highway. The sound came again, low frequency, almost felt more than heard. It wasn't from the radio this time. It came from the pavement, vibrating through my boots. I knelt down and placed my hand flat on the ground. The asphalt pulsed, once, twice, in rhythm with my heart. I pulled my hand back, but the rhythm didn't stop. The highway was alive. Headlights appeared behind me, small at first, then brighter, gaining fast. I waved both arms, but the car never slowed. The driver didn't see me, or maybe couldn't. The vehicle tore past. No driver, no plates, no sound except the wind it left behind. I turned to watch it vanish, but instead of taillights, all I saw was a second road, running perfectly parallel to mine. Same slope, same turns, just reversed. And on that mirrored highway, a truck identical to mine crawled forward, its headlights cutting through the dark. My own silhouette was visible inside. The radio cracked. Marcus Lane, eastbound. My name again. Highway 50 active, transmission confirmed. I reached into the cab and grabbed the mic. Who are you? My voice shook. What do you want from me? A pause. Then calm as a dispatcher. We want you to stay on the line. The world around me flickered. The stars dimmed. The air turned blue-white. I stumbled back, and the pavement beneath me shifted like something massive had rolled beneath it. A shape rose from the far side of the canyon, a steel tower, skeletal and impossibly tall, lights blinking red along its frame. I hadn't seen any tower there before. Then again, I hadn't seen a lot of things that were suddenly here. Every speaker in the truck came alive. The emergency broadcast tone wailed, distorted and stretched like metal bending underwater. Over it, the same voice read off a list of coordinates, then a series of dates. The last date was tomorrow's. Highway 50 closed indefinitely due to ongoing transmission event, it said. Then laughter, mine again, weak, wrong. The next part happened fast. The tower flickered once and collapsed without a sound. The world went silent, except for the static. Then slowly, I realized I wasn't standing anymore. I was sitting in the driver's seat again, hands on the wheel, headlights on. But the clock wasn't frozen at 12:07 anymore. It was counting backward. The road ahead twisted like it was made of rubber. My tires screeched against nothing. And then I was falling, not down, but through. The cab rattled, glass shattered, and suddenly I was driving inside the static itself. The lines on the road dissolved, replaced by numbers scrolling past the windshield like I was inside a broadcast feed. Coordinates, altitudes, frequencies, every one of them labeled Colorado, emergency band. Outside, I could still see faint outlines of the real world, mountain peaks, power lines, even the glow of Gunnison somewhere far below. But they looked paper-thin, like projections. The highway split again and again, multiplying like cracks in glass. Each new road held a copy of my truck, each one driving slightly out of sync. Some sped up, others slowed, and one lagged behind completely until its headlights went out for good. My CB crackled again. Highway 50 eastbound, this is Control. We're losing you. I grabbed the mic. Control, what is this? What's happening to me? The reply came layered. One male, one female, one mechanical, all in perfect chorus. You're entering the dead zone. I looked at the fuel gauge, empty. Then I realized the engine wasn't even running. The hum filling the cab wasn't mechanical. It was the road itself. Every light on the dashboard pulsed with that same heartbeat rhythm I'd felt through the asphalt. I turned off the key. The hum didn't stop. Outside, the mirrored highways had begun folding inward, converging like veins toward a single point. A bright, circular glow rose from the intersection where they met, blinding and slow. In the light, I saw shapes. Hundreds of vehicles frozen in place. Cars, trucks, even school buses, all empty, all pointing toward that glow. I climbed out and stepped onto the pavement. The noise grew softer, almost gentle. The glow pulsed once, and every vehicle's radio clicked on in perfect unison. All of them whispered the same word, drawn out and overlapping like a chant. Return. My chest tightened. My breath came short. The glow expanded, washing over everything. And for a second I saw faces in the light, dozens of them, pressed against the glass of invisible windshields. I thought I recognized one. Mine. Then everything inverted. The world folded like film through a reel, showing pieces of Colorado that didn't belong here. Frozen lakes from the north, red canyons from the south, the white crest of Murdoch Pass floating upside down above me. It was all there, stitched together like a map printed wrong. The highway wound through it, endless, self-repeating. I started running, following the yellow lines, even though they curved and split in impossible directions. My feet didn't touch solid ground anymore. The pavement rippled like heat haze. The air tasted like static. Then a voice beside me whispered, "You shouldn't have picked up." I turned. No one was there. Just a faint shimmer of heat in the shape of a person walking beside me, matching my pace. Its head tilted toward me like it was listening. "We've been waiting for someone to answer," it said. My own voice doubled over itself. Ahead, I could see the end, or what looked like one. A single rest stop sitting in the middle of the glow. The sign above it read, Murdoch Pass Lookout. Elevation 11,300 arrived. I stumbled toward it, half blind. The light dimmed just enough for me to see a row of payphones along the guardrail, each one ringing. The first phone stopped after one ring, the second after two, the third kept ringing. I lifted the receiver, expecting static. Instead, I heard my dispatcher, Nick. "Marcus? Jesus, we thought you went off the road. They found your truck wrecked near the canyon. No driver, just the engine running." I started to speak, but he kept talking. "We've been hearing your radio all week. Same phrase, looping. You need to get off that road now." "I'm trying," I said, but my voice came out wrong, thin, far away, like it was coming through another speaker. Nick's voice cracked with fear. "Marcus, where are you calling from?" I looked down at the phone. There was no keypad, no cord, no label, just a smooth metal plate and a reflection staring back at me. My reflection, but it wasn't moving like I was. Its mouth was still open, whispering one word over and over, "Return." The line went dead. The glow brightened. The reflection smiled. I dropped the receiver and turned to run, but the rest stop was gone. In its place was the open highway again, stretching forever in both directions, stars burning cold above the Rockies. My truck sat on the shoulder, headlights on, door open, engine idling. I climbed back inside, shaking. The CB light blinked once. Highway 50 eastbound. This is Control. Welcome home. The voice was mine. The dashboard clock rolled back to 12:07. When I moved into the cabin on Black Timber Ridge, I thought it would be temporary, just a place to stay for a few months while I finished my contract with the Forest Service. Colorado was quiet that winter, the kind of quiet that rings in your ears after a while. The snow fell early that year, thick and heavy, burying the switchbacks that led up to the ridge. From town, it looked like a white scar cutting through the dark pines. I liked that view. It made me feel like I was on the edge of the world. The cabin itself had been sitting empty for decades. Records said it used to belong to a ranger named Douglas Reed, who went missing in the late 70s. They never found him. The Forest Service kept the property but stopped renting it out. Too remote, too much maintenance, they said. When I asked about staying there, my supervisor just shrugged and told me if I could clear the road myself, I could have it for the season. I spent the first 2 days hauling fallen branches and ice off the drive, and by the third day, I'd already stopped locking the door. The nearest neighbor was 6 miles away. I told myself that kind of isolation was healthy, that maybe the silence would finally clear my head after years of noise. It did, at first. Inside, everything smelled faintly of pine resin and dust. The previous occupant must have been a collector. There were stacks of notebooks on the shelves, all labeled with months and years. Some went back to 1973. I flipped through one the first night and found that every page was covered with short, repetitive notes. One sentence over and over again, written in the same slanted handwriting. Sound is memory. Sound is memory. Sound is memory. I figured Reed must have been some kind of amateur researcher. Maybe he'd recorded animal calls or storm patterns. I didn't think much of it. The cabin was warm, the wood stove worked, and the radio picked up just enough local chatter to remind me other people still existed. But on the 5th night, something strange happened. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of someone talking in the living room. The voice was low, steady, almost polite. I thought maybe I'd left the radio on, but when I checked, it was silent. The only sound was the slow crackle of the wood stove and that faint whisper coming from the far wall. It was so quiet, I had to lean close to hear it. "Can you hear me now?" it said. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, staring at bare wood panels that looked perfectly ordinary. The next morning, I told myself I'd dreamed it. But later that day, while cutting firewood outside, I realized I could still hear something from inside the cabin. Not words this time, just a faint hum, almost like an electrical current trapped in the walls. It pulsed softly in rhythm with the wind. When I put my hand on the siding, I could feel a vibration under the wood, not strong enough to shake anything, but enough to let me know it was real. That night, I went through the notebooks again. Near the end of one, a different sentence appeared, underlined several times. The structure retains frequencies longer than the body. Below it, a small sketch of the cabin, with strange wave patterns drawn around it like ripples in water. I remember closing the book and staring at the stove for a long time, thinking about what that meant. The structure retains frequencies longer than the body. Maybe Reed wasn't studying weather or animals. Maybe he was recording himself. By the second week, I started hearing other sounds. Footsteps crossing the floor when I was lying in bed, whispering from the corners of the room that stopped the moment I looked up. It wasn't constant, just enough to make me question how quiet things really were out there. One afternoon, while repairing a leak under the sink, I heard a faint laugh right beside me, like someone exhaling through their teeth. It was close enough that the air on my neck went cold. I stood so fast I hit my head on the counter and nearly ran outside. I didn't leave, though. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of acoustics, pipes, old wood shifting. But that same evening, as I was writing my daily field report, I noticed something new in the room. The cabin had an old tape recorder built into the wall by the desk, the kind used for dictation decades ago. It wasn't plugged in, and the reels were empty. Still, as I wrote, I kept hearing a faint click from the recorder, like it was turning on and off by itself. Every time I looked up, the reels were still, but the click was real. It always came after I stopped typing. Later that week, I decided to test it. I set up my phone to record sound overnight, left it on the table, and went to bed. When I listened the next morning, I expected to hear maybe creaking or wind. Instead, I heard my own voice, not sleep-talking, full sentences, calm, deliberate, and nothing I remembered saying. "You should listen before you forget," I told myself in the recording. Then faintly, another voice responded, "Sound is memory." I deleted the file immediately, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I checked the phone's metadata. The recording was time-stamped exactly 1 minute before I started it. Somehow, it had already been recording before I pressed record. After that, I stopped sleeping much. I stayed up sitting near the stove, listening. Sometimes the cabin would creak like it was breathing. Sometimes it would hum quietly, and then stop the moment I noticed. And sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the voice again, closer every time. It never sounded angry, just curious, like it was trying to finish a sentence it had been practicing for years. A snowstorm hit near the end of the month, cutting off the road entirely. I was stuck. I still had power from the generator, but the radio went out. The silence became unbearable. Every noise felt sharper, like it had edges. I tried reading to distract myself, but even the pages made a sound that echoed too long in the room. Eventually, I stopped talking, stopped playing music, stopped moving unless I had to. The less noise I made, the less the cabin answered back. Then came the night it recorded itself. I woke to the faint sound of tape reels spinning. When I went to the wall recorder, the reels were moving on their own, turning slowly, even though there was no tape. I just stood there, staring at the empty spools as they rotated and clicked, rotated and clicked. The air felt heavy, charged, like before lightning strikes. Then the machine stopped, and I heard breathing behind me, steady, human, close enough to fog the back of my neck. I turned. No one. The air shimmered faintly, the way heat does on asphalt. For a second I thought I saw a face, not clear enough to recognize, just the outline of eyes and a mouth moving in rhythm with that breathing sound. Then it vanished. The recorder clicked again. This time it played back. Not my voice. Not exactly. Something that sounded like me but distorted, stretched thin. The structure retains frequencies longer than the body. I left the cabin that night, wading through waist-deep snow until I couldn't feel my legs. I made it as far as the ridge before the storm grew too thick to see. The sky pulsed white every few seconds, lightning with no thunder. When I turned back, the cabin windows were glowing faintly. The light flickered in rhythm with the sound of the wind. I spent the rest of the night in the truck, engine running, waiting for daylight. When the sun finally rose, the snow had stopped, and the cabin looked normal again. No light, no movement, just a quiet, empty house on a ridge. I told myself I'd imagined it all, that isolation had finally gotten to me. But when I started the truck to leave, I noticed something. The radio wasn't picking up static anymore. It was playing something soft, barely audible at first, then clearer. It was my voice, repeating the same words over and over. Sound is memory. Sound is memory. I turned off the ignition. The voice kept playing. I didn't turn the key again. I just sat there, listening to myself on the radio. The voice sounded calm, but underneath it was that same pulse I'd heard in the cabin walls. A slow, living rhythm that didn't belong to any machine. The words looped 3 times, then stopped. Silence. Then the faint click of a recorder being rewound. I tried to leave, but the truck wouldn't move. The tires spun in the snow, though the ground beneath looked solid. The air outside shimmered, thick as static. I kept pressing the gas until the engine coughed and died. When I stepped out, everything felt too still. The wind had stopped, and even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. Halfway to the porch, I heard the cabin sigh. That's the only way I can describe it. A long, slow exhale that rattled the windows. The snow at my feet trembled, and the faint hum began again. It came from inside the walls, spreading outward through the ground like roots. I took one more step and felt the vibration move under my boots, following me. When I opened the door, the air inside hit me like warm breath. The stove was still cold, but the whole room felt alive. The notebooks were scattered across the floor, pages flipped open as though caught mid-gust, but the air was perfectly still. On the wall above the recorder, fresh writing had appeared in thick black ink. "You're the experiment now." I should have run, but curiosity kept me rooted. I went to the recorder and found a single tape sitting on the desk. No label, just a faint smear of soot across its side. I picked it up and felt heat radiating through the plastic. When I set it in the machine, the reels began to spin on their own. The first thing I heard was wind, then a voice. Not Reed's, not mine. Female, shaky but determined. She said, "Phase 3, subject retention at 87%. Then static, then screaming, quick, cut off. Another voice followed, lower, older, almost whispering. "Sound is memory. The structure retains frequencies longer than the body." I yanked the tape out, but the sound kept playing. The walls pulsed, faint ripples pushing through the wood like water under glass. Every knot in the timber looked like an eye, and as the room darkened, I could swear they blinked. My reflection in the window moved a half-second behind me, lips forming words I couldn't hear. I backed toward the door, but the floorboards flexed beneath my feet, bending upward like something was pushing from below. The hum grew louder, a deep frequency that rattled my ribs. I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears, but the sound wasn't in the air anymore. It was inside me. Every heartbeat carried it, vibrating through my teeth. I heard the voice again, closer now, whispering from inside my skull. "You're recording." The light bulb above me flickered and burst. Everything went dark except the faint glow coming from between the boards. It wasn't fire. It was blue, the color of old film projection. Shadows on the wall began to move, figures pacing, sitting, talking. They were outlines at first, then clearer. People sitting exactly where I had sat, writing in the same notebook, muttering the same phrases. Each one faded after a few seconds, replaced by another. Reed was among them. So were others I didn't recognize. Some of them had no faces. I stumbled backward, and my shoulder hit the wall. The wood was warm, almost soft, and I felt something pressing back, like a hand mirroring mine from the other side. It pushed harder, until I felt my skin flush with heat. Then the voice returned, whispering through the timber. "You heard me once. You answered. You became part of it." I ran outside. Snow blinded me, sharp and bright under the moon. The forest roared, though no wind touched my face. When I looked back, the cabin's windows weren't glowing anymore. They were dark. But sound poured out of them, rolling across the ridge like thunder underwater. The ground under my boots trembled with each pulse. I didn't stop running until I reached the tree line. The forest swallowed most of the noise, but not all of it. I could still hear the rhythm, faint but steady. I followed it down the slope, trying to reach the service road. The deeper I went, the more the forest changed. The trees grew denser, their trunks darker, the snow beneath them melting even though the air was freezing. Somewhere ahead, the hum changed pitch, deeper, slower. I found a clearing that shouldn't have been there. The snow was gone, replaced by wet soil and dozens of thin wooden stakes driven into the ground. At the top of each stake hung a small speaker, rusted and cracked but still humming. The sound from them blended into one long, trembling note that made my stomach twist. Each speaker had a number scratched into its side, some faded, some fresh. The newest one read Ear 47. I moved closer and noticed something half buried near the center. A tape recorder, identical to the one in the cabin, its reels turning slowly. The cable ran straight into the soil, disappearing under the dirt. I pressed stop. It kept spinning. Then the reels slowed on their own and began to rewind. The hum around the clearing faded until everything went silent. When the playback started, I heard footsteps crunching through snow, breathing, then my own voice saying, "Sound is memory." I staggered backward, shaking my head. I hadn't recorded that. The tape clicked again, and another sound came through. Something heavy sliding across wood, followed by a new voice, smooth and calm. Phase 4 initiated, subject 047 confirmed. That wasn't my name. I looked down, expecting to see the recorder still spinning, but it had stopped. The sound was coming from the soil itself. The ground beneath the speakers began to pulse, soft at first, then harder, until cracks opened between the stakes. Warm air poured out, carrying that same whisper I'd heard in the cabin. "Stay until you're heard." I turned and ran back toward the ridge, but every direction looked the same. The forest rearranged itself, trees twisting to block the path. The hum returned, louder, vibrating through my chest. I could feel words forming inside it. Voices layered together, hundreds of them repeating the same phrase in perfect rhythm. The structure retains frequencies longer than the body. Branches broke overhead. The snow fell in waves, muffling everything but that one line. I tripped, fell face first into the drift, and for a moment, there was silence. When I lifted my head, I was back on the porch. My footprints from earlier were gone. Through the window, I could see light flickering inside. The cabin door creaked open before I touched it. Warm air spilled out, carrying a smell like ozone and burnt pine. The notebooks on the floor were gone. In their place were small black tapes stacked neatly on the table. Each one had a number written on its side. The one on top said, "Dope 48. The hum stopped. Total silence. I reached for the tape, but before I touched it, the reels in the wall recorder began to spin. Slowly, the speaker crackled and a voice spoke, my own, tired and distant. "If you're hearing this, you stayed too long." The cabin exhaled again. The floor vibrated once. Then everything went black. I woke at sunrise sitting in my truck, parked at the bottom of the ridge. The road behind me was smooth and untouched. No tire tracks, no footprints. The radio was off. The notebook in the passenger seat was open to a new page, filled with words written in my handwriting. Sound is memory. Structure is body. Frequency is soul. When I turned the key, the radio flickered alive. A new voice spoke, steady, mechanical. Phase 5 initiated. Subject 048 confirmed. Then silence. When the water started pulling back from the edges of the old reservoir, everyone called it a miracle. The county finally decided to drain it after years of drought, claiming they needed to reclaim what they could of the buried farmland beneath. They sent me out first, someone who knew how to map, measure, and keep quiet. I remember standing on the cracked concrete of the boat ramp, looking out at what used to be a lake and seeing the faint shapes just beneath the surface. Lines that weren't natural. Sharp corners and broken walls tracing out the ghost of a town. They'd flooded it back in the 60s when they built the dam, said it was uninhabitable, said they relocated everyone and everything before the water came. They lied, of course. The project file said the town's name was Derringer Plains, population 742, a farming community built on a shallow valley that turned into a bowl when the dam was raised. They gave the residents 6 weeks to move. Some did, some didn't. By the time the water reached the rooftops, half the valley was gone, and the other half had been forgotten. When I first walked the exposed banks, it smelled like rust and wet leaves. Mud clung to my boots and pulled with each step like something reluctant to let go. The wind carried a faint sweetness, too faint to be rot, but too heavy to be clean. I set up markers along what was left of the main road, placing flags where old structures poked through the dirt. Foundations, fence posts, the rim of a rusted windmill. About an hour in, I found the first grave. It was shallow, the headstone barely visible, tilted sideways under a sheet of mud. The lettering had been half erased, but one word still clung to the stone. Daughter. No name, no dates, just that single word carved deep enough to survive 40 years underwater. I logged it, flagged it, and kept going. The further I walked, the more the valley began to reveal itself. The mud gave way to hard-packed soil, and here and there I could see outlines of gardens, fences, even parts of the road. But what struck me most was how quiet it was. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind moving through grass. It was as if the place existed outside time, waiting for someone to notice. On the second day, I started finding more graves. Dozens of them. They were scattered across what used to be the churchyard, the stones lying in irregular rows. Most had been smoothed by silt, but some still bore faint traces of engraving. A few had been broken clean in half. I knelt by one and brushed the dirt away with my glove. The name underneath looked familiar. Not from the project file, not from anywhere official. Familiar in a way I couldn't explain, like I'd read it somewhere I wasn't supposed to. By the third day, the fog started rolling in from the dam. Not thick, just enough to dull the horizon. The reclamation crew was supposed to join me that morning, but they radioed from town to say the roads were washed out. I didn't mind. I preferred being alone. I told myself that's why I'd taken the job, to be away from everything that reminded me of what I'd lost. The sun set early in the valley. Light never seemed to reach the floor of it. I spent the evening going through old survey notes in the cabin they'd given me on the ridge. The previous team had documented the flood back in 1964. Measurements, rainfall data, lists of evacuated properties. On the last page, someone had scribbled a sentence in pencil. "The water remembers." I stared at it for a long time before closing the folder. That night, I dreamed of walking down a street half submerged in black water. Houses leaned on their sides, porches half gone. The sky was colorless, and under the surface, something moved slowly, pressing upward from beneath like a hand dragging along the ceiling of a room. When I woke, my pillow was damp. I told myself it was sweat. The next morning, the valley was different. The fog was thicker, hugging the ground, turning every shape into a pale outline. When I walked down the slope, I saw movement. Subtle, rhythmic, like the soil itself was breathing. I knelt and touched the ground. It was warm. The top layer crumbled, and a faint trickle of water seeped through the cracks. The graves had shifted overnight. Not by much, just enough that the headstones weren't facing the same direction anymore. Some had risen slightly, their edges sharper, as if they were being pushed up from below. The soil around them was darker, wetter. I marked it in my log, though my hands shook while I wrote. By afternoon, the fog had turned gold. The air tasted like metal. I could see faint outlines of structures farther down the valley. Wooden frames, maybe parts of houses. I decided to go farther than the markers allowed. Every few steps, the ground made a low popping sound under my boots, like bubbles bursting. When I looked back, my footprints filled with shallow water. Half a mile in, I reached what had once been Main Street. I could tell by the row of stones and the fragments of signposts. The ground sloped downward toward the center, where a dry fountain stood. Around it were more graves, but these weren't old. The soil was loose, the stones cleaner. Some had fresh flowers laid in front of them, not wilted, not old, fresh. That was when I realized I wasn't alone. There were footprints beside mine, smaller, lighter. They led from the graves toward the fountain. I followed them without thinking, counting each step until I stood at the edge of the dry basin. The inside was smooth concrete, cracked but intact. And there, in the center, something pale jutted out of the mud. I climbed down and brushed it clean with my glove. It was marble, a gravestone, newer than the others, with a name carved so sharp it looked freshly cut. My name. I dropped the marker in my hand. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at it, trying to find a logical reason. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was a prank by one of the crews. But the longer I looked, the less I believed that. The date on the stone wasn't years old. It was that day's date. The fog thickened, swallowing the horizon. I turned to head back toward the ridge, but the path was gone. The ground around the fountain shimmered like wet glass. A faint layer of water had pooled across the valley floor. It wasn't deep, maybe an inch, but it stretched as far as I could see, perfectly still. When I looked down, the reflection wasn't mine. It was someone standing just behind me, face pale, clothes torn, eyes hollow. The reflection moved closer, even though I didn't. Its hand reached forward, fingers brushing the surface of the water from the other side. I froze. The ripples spread outward, distorting the entire valley. The ground shifted. The fountain sank an inch. The graves nearby began to open, not in bursts of dirt, but in slow, deliberate collapses like the earth was breathing out. From each one, a faint shimmer rose, light without color, shape without form. They drifted toward the reflection in the water, and for a second I thought they were merging with it. But no, they were forming something else. A town, walls, roofs, windows, the outlines of Derringer Plains, rebuilding itself in pure reflection beneath my feet. The houses were hollow at first, just silhouettes, then solidified as the fog rolled in around them. The sky above stayed bright, but the world below darkened until it was night under the water. I backed away, my boots slipping on the wet ground. Every step I took was mirrored perfectly beneath me, delayed by half a second. When I turned to run, the reflection didn't follow. It just stood there, watching. By the time I reached the ridge, the reservoir was no longer empty. The valley was full again, glimmering under the last light of sunset, as if it had never been drained at all. And in the water's reflection, I could still see the lights of the town burning. By the next morning, the reservoir looked almost normal again. The surface was calm, still holding that dull gray light that makes you forget what time it is. I stood at the overlook with my map spread open, trying to convince myself the whole thing hadn't happened. The fountain, the grave, the reflection that wasn't mine. All of it must have been exhaustion, dehydration, something explainable. But the map didn't match the terrain anymore. Whole sections of the valley floor had shifted overnight. Where there should have been mud flats, there were now outlines of roads. I hiked down before sunrise to check. The air smelled clean, colder than it should have been, and frost laced the reeds. The trail that had taken hours to cross yesterday felt shorter now, the slope more gradual, as if the land itself had adjusted to make room for me. When I reached the shore, my footprints from the day before were gone. In their place, rows of tire tracks, curved across the mud. They were old, imprinted deep and filled with clear water. I followed them until they stopped at the edge of what looked like a house foundation. There were flowers sitting on the concrete step, white lilies still wet. Their stems were wrapped in twine, and the air around them carried a scent like rain on dust. I wanted to believe someone else had been here, that the crews had arrived early, but the road was still closed. No one could have reached the ridge except me. The house wasn't whole, just a skeleton of walls forming angles where rooms might have been. The paint had flaked away long ago, but I recognized something beneath the decay. A faint shade of yellow that matched the house I grew up in outside Pueblo. The more I looked, the more details I recognized. The porch rail, the window frames, the pattern of nail heads across the siding. I could almost see my father's truck in the driveway. Inside, the air was warm. Dust floated in the light like fine ash. There was a table in the center of the room, though the legs looked warped, as if they'd been underwater for decades. On it sat a single photograph encased in glass, edges blackened by moisture. I wiped the surface clean with my sleeve. It was me. Younger, maybe by 20 years, standing beside a woman I hadn't thought about in decades. Her name was Anna. We'd been engaged once long before I took the job that brought me here. We'd planned to move north, start over somewhere new, but the flood happened that year. Not this one, another one. And I stayed behind to help with recovery work. She left without me. I hadn't seen her since. I put the photograph down and stepped back. The walls around me seemed taller now. The room had grown, stretching into shadow that hadn't been there a minute ago. The doorway behind me had vanished, replaced by another wall of pale wood. I reached for where the window should have been and felt glass, cold and solid. Beyond it, water pressed against the panes. Not deep, not moving, just waiting. The house groaned softly. Mud trickled through the cracks in the floorboards, carrying the smell of the lake. I turned toward the interior and the space shifted again. Rooms unfolded in silence. A hallway lined with closed doors, a staircase leading upward, a faint glow spilling from beneath the nearest doorframe. I knew that light. I'd seen it once through hospital blinds the night my father died. The sterile yellow of machines running after the patient was gone. I walked toward it. The floor felt soft under my boots, almost breathing. The first door opened with no sound. Inside was a bedroom, small and bare except for a bed and a nightstand. The blanket on the bed was damp, patterned with faint rings where water had dried and returned again. A figure lay beneath it, thin and still. I forced myself closer, half expecting a corpse, half expecting nothing at all. But when I pulled the blanket back, there was only a hollow impression on the mattress, like someone had just gotten up. The pillow was warm. On the nightstand sat a ring box, open and empty. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The house shifted again. A long, slow tilt, as if the entire valley had exhaled. The floor beneath me rippled like shallow water, and I realized I could see the reflection of the room below it. The bed, the table, the photograph, all mirrored perfectly in motionless water, just under the surface of the wood. Only the reflection wasn't empty. In it, someone still lay on the bed, eyes open, watching me. I stumbled back, and the floor cracked, thin veins spreading outward. A soundless wave passed through the walls, bending them outward. The window shattered inward without a noise, and water began to pour in, slow and heavy like honey. It didn't splash or rush. It just filled the space, rising around my ankles, my knees, my chest. The cold hit in layers. I could see the door above me, distant as if the room had grown taller. I held my breath and pushed upward, but the water thickened, resisting every movement. Through the surface, I saw the photograph drifting off the table, face down. Beneath it, the reflection me was still standing, perfectly still, staring up with a faint smile. The pressure grew unbearable. I reached the surface and broke through, not into air, but into fog. The house was gone. I was standing in the middle of the valley again, the water around me knee-deep and spreading. The hills were barely visible. The fountain rose out of the fog like a monument. Around it, the graves glowed faintly under the surface. Some of the stones had changed since yesterday. They no longer bore names. They bore words like forgiven and returned. I tried to wade toward the slope, but the current moved against me, gentle but constant, guiding me back toward the center. Every step forward sank deeper. My legs ached, my chest burned from cold, and then I saw movement ahead. The same reflection figure from the day before, standing where the fountain had been. It wasn't mimicking me now. It was waiting. As I drew closer, I realized the reflection wasn't alone. Behind it stood a town, rebuilt in perfect silence. Derringer Plains, as it had been the day before the flood. I could see lanterns glowing in windows, people standing in doorways still as portraits. None of them moved, yet I felt their attention like heat on my skin. The reflection lifted its hand and pointed to the water between us. Beneath the surface lay another gravestone. I could just make out the inscription through the distortion. He came back. I stepped closer until the water reached my chest. The world above and below began to blur into one. I could see both skies at once, one gray and one burning with stars. I reached for the reflection's outstretched hand, though some part of me knew what would happen. When our fingers touched the surface, the cold disappeared. The water wasn't liquid anymore. It felt like air, weightless and endless. The reflection stepped forward and passed through me. For a moment, everything inverted. The valley upside down, the graves glowing like constellations. I saw my own body beneath the surface, eyes open, motionless. Then the world settled. I was standing on dry ground again, at the edge of the new reservoir. The sun was setting behind the ridge, painting the water red. The map in my hand showed nothing but open land, no record of Derringer Plains. My logbook was empty. The date on my watch had stopped on the day I found my name carved in stone. The county never sent another crew. The reports say the reclamation project was canceled due to unstable terrain. They sealed the road to the ridge and posted a warning sign about flash floods. But when the light hits the reservoir at dusk, you can still see streets under the surface, faint lines of foundation rooftops, the outline of a church spire. And sometimes, if you stand there long enough, you can see someone walking along the water's edge, carrying flags and marking points that no longer exist. They always stop in the same place, right beside the fountain, looking down, at a grave with their own name carved into it. When you drive highways long enough, you start to recognize a certain kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, they're the one that feels staged. That's how I first knew something was wrong with Mile 71. I'd been a highway patrol officer for 12 years, running the eastern Colorado stretch that dissolves into Kansas. Flatland patrol, dust, tumbleweed, and hours of nothing. Most of the job was routine. Abandoned cars, burned out lights, cattle crossing where they shouldn't. But late last August, dispatch started logging calls about vehicles left running in the middle of the lane. Doors open, engines still idling, no one inside. It happened 3 nights in a row, always somewhere between mile markers 70 and 72. We started calling it the Nowhere Mile. The first night I checked it, I thought I'd found the answer fast. A gray Camry sat angled across the white line, headlights on low beam, radio still humming static, keys in the ignition. No plates, just the dealer tag from a Wichita lot. Inside, the driver's seat was warm, coffee still steaming in the cup holder. I circled once, called it in, waited for backup. That's when I noticed the mile marker behind me was blank. No number, no logo. Just green paint worn smooth by wind. I turned to check the next one up the road. 71 was there, bold, reflective, clean. But when I looked back, the Camry was gone. Not moved, not stolen, gone. The road was empty. The tire marks leading to it ended mid-asphalt, like someone had erased the rest. I told myself I was tired, logged the call as a false report, went home. The next day, I drove the same stretch in daylight. Nothing strange, just open plains and heat shimmer. But the map in my cruiser showed an extra turnoff. A narrow service road branching east between 70 and 71. I'd driven that highway for years. There'd never been a turnoff. I slowed, pulled over, and there it was. A dirt lane cutting into the wheat fields, marked with a hand-painted sign that read simply 1 mile. No arrow, no name. I followed it for maybe 5 minutes, though the clock stayed frozen at 4:07 p.m. The road didn't bend, didn't change, just a single track between fields too still to be real. Even the wheat seemed arranged, each stalk pointing in the same direction. A mile later, the lane rejoined the main highway, right beside mile marker 71. I'd made a perfect loop without turning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about how the air on that road hadn't moved. So I went back. No sirens, no lights. Just me, a thermos of coffee, and the cruiser's dash cam running. The mile markers reflected clean in the headlights. 69, 70, 71, 72, everything normal. Until the horizon began to repeat. The same billboard for a tire shop I'd passed an hour earlier appeared again. Same rip in the canvas, same bullet holes through the O in discount. Then again, exactly 30 seconds later. The odometer showed a single mile traveled, but the landmarks looped every 60 seconds like scenery on a treadmill. I turned around. The same stretch repeated backward. Mile 71, 70, 71, 70. The GPS blinked, coordinates alternating between 2 identical sets. When I stopped the car, the horizon stayed moving. I stepped out into air that felt compressed, as if sound couldn't live in it. Far ahead, the road glowed faintly blue, like heat lightning trapped under the surface. I walked toward it. Each step made the asphalt feel softer. By the time I reached the next marker, my boots left shallow impressions that filled with light before fading. The sign read 71. Painted backward, numbers mirrored. Behind it stretched another cruiser, mine. Lights off, door open, parked exactly as I'd left it minutes ago. Only I was still standing in the lane. The wind finally moved, carrying the smell of warm rubber and static. Then everything went quiet again. I tried radioing dispatch. The signal cut instantly, but a voice came through anyway, my own. Same tone, same words, a few seconds delayed. I turned off the mic, but the echo kept repeating, growing fainter until it became the hum of the engine itself. That's when I realized the car idling beside the reversed mile marker was the same gray Camry from the first night. Steam curled from the hood, door ajar, coffee in the holder still fresh. Only now the seat wasn't empty. Someone sat behind the wheel, head tilted back, eyes open, face matching mine perfectly, down to the badge on the chest. The reflection didn't mimic me. It breathed out when I breathed in. The rhythm of the entire highway matched it. Every few seconds, the white lines on the asphalt pulsed, synchronized with that breath. I stepped closer, hand on my gun, without meaning to draw. The figure blinked once, slow, deliberate, and the dash lights flared red. For a moment, the entire road behind me filled with identical cars, hundreds, maybe thousands, each parked in the same position, engines running, my face behind every windshield. The horizon folded inward like a closing book. I don't remember blacking out, only waking up inside my cruiser at dawn. The dash cam was off. The fuel gauge read E, though I'd filled the tank the night before. Outside, everything was ordinary again. Trucks passing, wind through the grass, sky pale with morning. I started the engine and drove west until I saw the sign for exit 17. Relief almost hurt. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. Mile 71, always behind me. The marker perfectly centered in the glass, shrinking but never disappearing. By sunrise, I'd convinced myself it was exhaustion, that the highway had played tricks on me the way heat does when the plains turn silver. I'd been awake 32 hours. My logbook was full of nonsense. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mile 71 was following me. At the station, dispatch greeted me with the same question twice in a row. The second. Time through. Her voice matched her first word for word, pitch, pause, inflection, a perfect replay. I stared at her lips. They weren't moving. The sound came from somewhere behind me, maybe from the radio that wasn't on. I drove home to clear my head. 40 miles west, the land rises in slow swells, the kind that make you forget you're gaining altitude. I passed farms, silos, irrigation ditches. Normal, almost comforting. Then I saw a sign I'd never noticed before. Next services, 1 mile. The font, the spacing, the bullet holes through the number. Identical to the hand-painted 1 mile sign from the service road. I kept driving. The houses thinned, fields giving way to open steppe. The wind died, and the sky took on that same stage silence. A moment later, the odometer clicked once, and there it was. Mile 71 again, right where my mailbox should have been. My driveway curved away exactly as always, gravel crunching under the tires, porch light still on from last night. I killed the engine and waited for the world to feel solid. It didn't. The air held its breath. Inside, everything sat where I'd left it. Jacket on the chair, badge on the counter, the half-empty coffee mug from 2 days ago. But the mug's logo caught my eye. It wasn't the state seal anymore. It was the mile marker, 71, printed backward, paint still glossy. I dropped it. It hit the floor without sound, shattering into perfect symmetrical halves. The phone on the wall rang once, just once. No caller ID, no missed call log. I stepped outside, needing air, but the horizon looked wrong. The sun hung too low, fixed in place like a prop light. The road beyond my fence shimmered, stretching in both directions until it curved upward into the haze. I walked toward it. The gravel underfoot blended into asphalt, the white divider lines appearing one after another. My front yard had become the highway. When I turned to look back, the house was gone. In its place stood another patrol cruiser, engine idling, lights off, window down. My own voice came from inside, speaking quietly into the radio. 71 clear, returning to base. But I was still standing in the road. The asphalt began to breathe. The painted lines rose and fell like ribs under skin. Each inhale pulled me forward. Every exhale left more of me behind. I tried to move sideways to step into the ditch, but there was no ditch, just more road unrolling, freshly painted, smooth as glass. Ahead, the horizon split open into rows of repeating sky. Clouds layered on clouds, each identical, each slightly out of sync, like overlapping film frames. I saw versions of myself driving through everyone, headlights slicing the same mile from opposite directions. I started running, thinking speed might break the pattern. My boots struck asphalt that rippled beneath each step. The world bent. For a moment, I thought I'd escaped. The wind returned. The color of the sky shifted. A new landscape forming ahead. Then I saw the sign, Mile 71. The numbers pulsed faintly, as if lit from behind. I kept running until my lungs ached, until the sign passed again and again like a heartbeat. 71, 71, 71. The repetition didn't loop exactly. Tiny differences crept in. A crow frozen mid-flight. A truck parked sideways. My own shadow stretched in a slightly new shape. The last time I passed the marker, there were 2 of them, then 3. Then a corridor of signs, narrowing into distance, each glowing a deeper shade of blue. I slowed, afraid to see where they led. Between the markers, the road began to tilt downward. The slope was almost imperceptible at first, then steeper, drawing me toward a horizon that refused to stay put. The air smelled like rain on hot metal. At the bottom of the grade stood a single figure, uniformed, motionless. My reflection again, but older. Gray at the temples, face hollow from sleeplessness. He held a clipboard against his chest, paper fluttering, though there was no wind. I walked closer until I could read the form. Incident report, Miles 71. Status, ongoing. Officer, unknown. The blank line pulsed once. Ink bled outward, filling letters one by one until it spelled my name. The copy looked up at me and smiled without recognition. He stepped backward into the road, merging with the asphalt like a shadow being erased. Behind him, the highway stretched farther than sight. The mile markers glowed white now, not blue, bright enough to cast their own light. Each one carried a number, 71.1, 71.2, 71.3, counting up infinitely, decimal by decimal, a measurement without end. I turned around to run the other way, but it was already the same, the decimals decreasing behind me, folding back into 71. I realized then that Mile 71 hadn't been a location. It was a measurement of presence. Every person who'd driven this stretch had left some trace of themselves behind, and the highway had learned to average them, an endless mean of motion and return. The patrol reports, the missing cars, the mirrored signs, all of it was the road trying to reconcile what 1 mile means when time stops counting. My legs grew heavy. The white paint beneath me shimmered, letters forming in the line itself. End of measurement. I looked up. The last visible sign ahead was blank, green metal, nothing written. I walked until I reached it. My reflection waited on its surface, flat and calm, holding perfectly still while I breathed. Then the numbers appeared, forming from the inside out. Mile 71.0. Everything went still. If you drive that way now, you'll see a single cruiser parked at the shoulder. Lights off, engine running, coffee still warm. Inside, the seat is empty. But if you stand long enough by the marker, the reflection in its paint will start to breathe. That's where the highway and I end. They sent us out because the maps stopped agreeing with themselves. USGS data, state geological grids, even satellite overlays, none of them matched. It began with a memo from Denver headquarters, the kind written by someone trying not to sound afraid. Elevation inconsistencies noted across San Luis Valley sector. Verify physical coordinates. My name is Nora Reeve, field cartographer. I've measured fault lines, avalanche zones, collapsed shafts, but I'd never seen the ground disagree about where it was. The valley looked normal from the highway, flat brown stretches, snow-capped ranges framing the distance. Then we reached the first anomaly, a ridge that shouldn't exist. It rose clean out of the plain, maybe 200 feet high, running north to south like a scar. No sign of quarrying, no spoil piles, no fresh vegetation. Just bedrock exposed in smooth plains. Too smooth, as if it had been printed there. We logged the coordinates, hammered in a stake, and moved on. That night, at the motel in Alamosa, I entered the data into the master sheet. By morning, the spreadsheet cells were blank. Not empty. Blank, as if they'd never contained text. Our handheld GPS units reset too. All waypoints erased, except one new label. Origin A. I tried to replot the ridge. The map panned endlessly, the cursor floating over a flat gray field where terrain should have been. Even Google Earth rendered it as ocean. We went back. The ridge was gone. In its place lay a trough half a mile wide, the dirt baked black like cooled lava. At the center, our steel stake lay twisted into the ground at an impossible angle pointing straight down. Underneath, the soil was warm. Brent, our seismologist, set up his vibrometer. The ground registered a pulse, steady, slow, 9 seconds between beats. He thought it was machinery deep below the surface, maybe an aquifer pump or mining equipment. But when we drove 20 miles north, the rhythm stayed identical. Colorado was beating like a single heart. We camped that night near the old grain silos outside Hooper. Around 3 a.m., the instruments picked up vertical displacement. The ground beneath us had risen 32 centimeters in 1 minute. I looked outside, expecting an earthquake, but the horizon remained still. The stars hung perfectly sharp. It felt less like movement and more like inflation, as if the earth were taking a breath. The next morning, Route 17 no longer existed. Our trucks sat on packed clay where asphalt had been. Telephone poles protruded halfway out of the soil, their wires humming faintly, though none were connected. We tried to orient ourselves using the mountains, but even they looked wrong. Closer, steeper. Their snow lines warped into spirals. Brent insisted we drive east until we hit the Front Range. 2 hours later, the mountains still never arrived. The odometer read 80 miles. The sun hung in the same position it had when we started. We stopped at what used to be the town of Blanca. The grid of streets was visible only as pale outlines in the dirt, foundations pressed into the surface like fossils. Where the church should have stood, a shallow depression marked the nave. In the center lay hundreds of stones arranged in perfect circles, each etched with survey numbers and human names. Some of them were ours. That evening, I opened my field journal and found the handwriting different. Tighter, more deliberate, like someone had traced my letters. Each page I'd written now contained coordinates I hadn't recorded. When plotted, they formed a pattern across southern Colorado. Lines intersecting in curves, spiraling inward toward a blank center, labeled only as depth 0. We followed them. We shouldn't have. The lines led us to a basin carved out of basalt, a bowl of earth so smooth it reflected the sky. At its center rose a single obelisk of compacted soil, 30 feet tall, capped with brass. No seams, no bolts, no marks from tools. It was as if the land itself had decided to grow a monument. The brass plate at the base bore one inscription, Elevation 0M. We were standing at sea level, halfway up the Rockies. Brent laughed first, a hollow sound that vanished in the open air. Then the wind stopped entirely. Every compass needle spun. The GPS screens went white. Our watches froze at 5:47 p.m. Shadows thickened until the bowl turned black around its edges, leaving the obelisk lit by some internal glow. The soil began to rise again, slowly, soundlessly. Rings formed in the ground around us, perfect concentric bands expanding outward. Where they passed, the dirt cracked, revealing layers of rock stacked in reverse, Cretaceous over Pleistocene, sandstone over shale, geology rewriting itself upward. Brent shouted something about tectonic reversal, but I already knew it wasn't tectonic. It was design. Each band that passed changed the color of the earth. Brown to red, red to gray, gray to bone white. Within minutes, the entire basin resembled a topographic map, sculpted in 3D, every contour line a living ridge of soil. At the center, the obelisk began to sink, leaving a hole that wasn't dark, but luminous, pale like dawn seen underwater. A current of air drew toward it. The coordinates in my notebook shifted on their own, updating to match the hole's expanding rim. Depth 0 became depth 1, then depth 2. We backed away, but the map updated faster. Every step we took was mirrored in the contour lines, our paths drawn in real time across the soil. When Brent tried to erase his footprint, the map redrew it instantly. The land wasn't recording us. It was re-rendering. We ran for the trucks, but there were no trucks. The vehicles had flattened into outlines pressed into the ground, door handles, license plates, and windows all mapped, as if embossed. The keys lay fused to the ignition shadows. I looked east for the mountains, west for the dunes, south for the lights of Alamosa. None existed. The horizon had folded inward, curving up like the inside of a sphere. Above it hung a second Colorado, inverted, the same terrain reflected upside down and slowly rotating. Between the two, a column of white haze joined earth to sky like an umbilical cord. The vibration returned, stronger now, steady, undeniable. It wasn't the ground shaking, it was the world recalibrating. I watched the obelisk vanish into its own light and felt my knees weaken. The notebook in my hand burned cold. When I opened it again, every line of text had condensed into one phrase repeating down the page. Elevation, seeking equilibrium. Then the pages dissolved into fine dust that lifted on an invisible breeze and drifted toward the basin. The dust didn't settle. It arranged itself mid-air, forming new contour lines glowing with pale light. Each particle a coordinate, each coordinate a heartbeat. The light swallowed the horizon first. It didn't flash or flare. It bled slowly, outward from the basin's center, until the ridges of soil and the sky above them were the same shade of colorless white. The boundaries between things collapsed. For a moment I thought I'd gone blind, but my hands were still visible, trembling outlines against the brightness. They looked transparent, like topographic layers stacked one over another. Brent called my name. His voice came from everywhere at once, as if the air had learned how to echo without walls. When I turned toward him, he was standing at the edge of the basin, though the distance between us kept changing. 1 second 20 feet, the next 50. The ground folded like a paper map under glass. Something deep beneath us groaned. Not a sound, more a flexing. The valley floor rippled once, and every contour shifted inward. The earth wasn't collapsing, it was focusing. I fell to my knees, clutching at the soil. The texture was wrong, too fine like compressed ash. When I pressed my fingers into it, it yielded, and pale light seeped from beneath. I wiped my hand on my jacket, but the glow clung to the creases in my skin. I looked up to call to Brent again, but he wasn't there. The space where he had stood now dipped slightly, as if something heavy had settled. When I ran toward it, I found a depression shaped like a human outline, smooth, depthless, perfectly scaled. I crouched beside it, afraid to touch it. In the center of the hollow was a set of coordinates etched directly into the dirt, numbers still shifting. I watched as the digits stabilized into a single date, today. My GPS unit beeped for the first time in hours. The screen showed a blinking marker labeled Depth 3. Every few seconds, the number ticked lower. Depth 4, Depth 5. The sky began to move. Not clouds, the sky itself, folding along invisible seams. Each crease bled faint light. The inverted Colorado overhead tilted until its mountains aligned perfectly with the ones beneath me. For one impossible moment, the two worlds, overlapped. Every canyon, road, town, and peak synchronized like matching fingerprints. Then everything began to sink. The plains curled inward. The mountains bowed. The air thickened to the consistency of syrup. I couldn't breathe without feeling weight press behind my ribs. All across the valley, shapes rose out of the ground, not buildings, not trees, but outlines of both, fusing together. Houses with walls made of granite veins, rivers flowing straight through abandoned main streets. Everything Colorado had ever been was surfacing at once. The entire state was remembering itself. I started walking because standing still felt worse. Every step I took drew a faint afterimage, a ghost of motion that lagged behind like a second body. After a dozen steps, the afterimages solidified. There were dozens of me, each one frozen mid-stride, each one facing a slightly different direction. They cast no shadow. The GPS continued to update. Depth 12, 13, 14. There was no sound but the slow rhythmic shift of soil. I looked down and saw new lines forming under my boots, not footprints, but text, names, locations, elevations. They moved with me, like the earth was writing me in. The basin had grown so vast that the curvature of the world seemed visible. At its far edge, I could see what looked like waves of land colliding. Dunes of granite crashing into forests of sandstone. Every impact sent ripples of light rolling toward me. When the first reached my feet, the ground turned translucent. Underneath was a map, not paper, not digital, a three-dimensional relief of everything that had ever existed here. I saw railroads that no longer operated, ghost towns erased by dams, forests felled in the 1800s, mines sealed and forgotten. Every history layered in motion, each moment replaying itself simultaneously. Above it all, hovering where the atmosphere should have ended, hung a shape like a sphere made of glass and breath, the inverted world reflected in full. The GPS beeped one final time. Depth 0. The horizon split. From the fracture, a column of earth rose slow as sleep, a new mountain building itself grain by grain. At first I thought it was random, but as it climbed higher, I recognized its ridges. They formed a familiar outline. The coordinates from my last entry. A mountain drawn from my notes, my measurements, my mistakes. It grew until its summit disappeared into the low white clouds. The air burned cold, thin, almost metallic. At the base, a path unrolled. A narrow, spiraling ledge carved into the rock like someone had known I'd come. I started climbing. Each step matched a data point I'd logged over the past week. Elevations, temperature readings, soil compositions. Every piece of data had become a physical stair. Halfway up, I found another survey marker hammered into the stone. The brass tag bore a single name, Reeve, primary reference point. I touched it. The metal was warm. Beneath it, I could feel a pulse. I kept climbing until the air thinned to silence. No wind, no pressure, only stillness. When I reached the summit, I found a flat slab of granite with a single engraving at its center. Map complete. Beneath it, smaller text. Elevation, null. Observer integrated. I tried to step back, but the ground held me there. The edges of my boots had already fused with the stone. My breath came out as pale vapor that didn't fade. It hung around my face like a halo, forming perfect concentric circles, contour lines drawn in air. I looked down the slope. The valley was gone. In its place stretched a single, continuous surface of pale rock etched with coordinates. Millions of them, scrolling in waves. Every ridge, every shadow, every particle corresponded to a number. Colorado had turned itself into one complete living map. The mountain beneath me began to vibrate softly, a hum too low to hear, but deep enough to feel in the bones. The granite glowed from within. When I looked at my hands, they were translucent again, but now I could see through the layers, nerves and veins replaced by lines and measurements, contour lines. I realized then what all the depths had meant. Not distance below the surface, distance between memory and matter. The state wasn't disappearing. It was descending into itself, becoming one perfect record. My chest felt weightless. The pulse beneath my feet matched my heartbeat exactly. The sky split once more, and the inverted Colorado above descended, folding perfectly into the one below. The two halves merged. For the briefest instant, I saw every road, every valley, every town alight like circuitry. And then there was no separation at all. The world went still. Somewhere in that endless surface, there remains a raised mark shaped like a human outline, labeled with one final coordinate string. If you find it, don't measure it. The map has already decided what you are. That's where the record, and Colorado, ends.